My son banned me from his graduation, texting, "Don't come, you'll ruin my day," then blocked my number. But when the dean invited our anonymous benefactor on stage, the camera found me in the front row. His smile died. If you are watching this, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me the city, the street, the room. Maybe where you live, a father's voice carries differently. Maybe in your place, a son answers when his father calls. Where I am, the screen went dark. That's how this begins. With a glow on my palm, a ping in the quiet of my kitchen, and a line of words I didn't think my own blood could write. "Don't come, you'll ruin my day." The message floated on a white background, as if it were harmless. A second later, my reply turned green and failed to deliver. He'd blocked my number. It was like watching a door close and lock while you're still standing on the porch, holding a cake that no one wants. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't shout. I just breathed. The fridge hummed in the corner. The clock gave its small, patient clicks. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked twice, then stopped. My hands were steady. I had learned a long time ago that anger burns out quickly, like dry grass. What lasts is something colder, something that makes you look at a door and measure it, something that lets you count hinges and see where the lock sits. I put the phone face down on the table and stared at the dented edge of my mug. There was a chip shaped like a small tooth. I'd meant to throw it out after she died. I never did. Some things stay, even when you try to move on. Some things ask to be remembered. I could hear her voice in the empty room. Not words, just the way she used to say my name when she was busy, soft and distracted, like music from a room you haven't walked into yet. She was the one who had dreamed of this day more than any of us. Our boy in a cap, our boy in a gown, our boy stepping into the light with a name that sounded bigger than our small life. She would have ironed his robe with the care she reserved for holy days. She would have sewed a loose button and wiped a smudge from his shoe, laughing when he squirmed. "Stand still, Star," she'd say. Star. That was her word for him. I sat there and let the memory stay because pushing it away would have made it grow teeth. The first time he wore anything like a gown, it was a pillowcase she cut and hemmed for a school play. He was a shepherd, too small to carry the staff without dragging it. He kept looking at us in the front row. Every few minutes he'd raise his hand and waggle his fingers at his mother, like he was waving at a distant boat. She put a finger to her lips and smiled. After, we walked him home between us. He held both our hands and swung like a bell. That night I told her, "One day it'll be a real gown." She kissed the back of my hand. "And you'll be there," she said. "Of course," I said, "of course grief can make time bend. One moment you are a man in a quiet kitchen staring at a phone that has just turned you into a stranger. The next, you are in a damp rental with a leaky sink, counting coins at a table that wobbles, both of you trying to stretch the month. I took extra hours, then extra shifts, then whatever work kept the lights on and the boy in good shoes. I learned the shape of fatigue like I learned my own signature. I could carry crates till my fingertips went numb. I could run cables under a stage, paint walls, mop floors, stack pallets, wait tables. People think hard work makes you noble. It doesn't. It makes you tired. But I didn't mind the tired. It was the tax. I paid it with both hands open. There were nights when I'd come home too late to see his face awake. I'd stand at the doorway and watch him sleep, with one knee popped up like he'd paused mid-run. The dinosaur blanket would be half on the floor. I'd put it back over him, and he'd sigh, deep, like the sea turning. She'd be right behind me in her robe, her hair tied up. "He ate," she'd say quietly, as if confessing a crime. "He did his homework. He missed you." I'd nod. I missed him too. Then the two of us would stand there like sentries outside a small kingdom, and I'd know that all the hours I was selling were buying this breath, this small, warm sound in the dark. When she got sick, we didn't show him every storm. We kept the worst of it locked up in late-night whispers and bathroom cabinets. I drove her to treatments before dawn, and then to work, telling jokes in the car that made no sense because they didn't need to. She laughed anyway to keep me brave. At the clinic, she would lean her head on my shoulder and tell me about future things, his graduation, what I'd wear, where we'd sit. "Front row," she always said. "We'll sit in the front row so he can find us right away." I'd tell her she should pick the tie. "The blue one," she'd say. "You look like a calm sea in that." She loved calm seas. They reminded her there were edges to storms. The last week, when she knew the end was walking down the hall, she made me promise two things. One was about the house. Keep it no matter what, because we had built it one paycheck at a time, and there was love in the walls. The second was about our son. Even if he pulls away, don't chase. Stand your ground, she said, her voice thin but steady. Be the place he can return to. I told her I would. I meant it. I still mean it. After the funeral, grief turned into a different animal. It stopped crying and started working. I looked at the numbers. I looked at the tuition fees and the small savings and the accounts she'd kept tidy with her neat handwriting. I ran my finger under each column and carried all the ones. I made phone calls I didn't want to make. I sat in offices where the carpet swallowed sound, and men with soft hands told me what could not be done. I smiled at them, thanked them for their time, then went home and found a way anyway. I won't tell you every door. I don't need to. Just understand that a father's job is not to be loud. It's to be effective. He was bright. He had always been bright. He read quickly, asked strange questions, lost himself in things that glowed and clicked. As he grew, our conversations changed shape. I would talk about work. He would talk about ideas so large they made my chest feel like a small room he'd outgrown. That's how it should be. Children move past us, or else we failed them. I cheered every time he moved forward, even when I couldn't keep up. When the acceptance letter came, he ran down the street waving it, and I stood on the stoop with my hands on my head, laughing until I cried. I could see her in that moment, standing in the doorway with me, laughing too, her hair in the wind, eyes shining. I said out loud, "We did it." The neighbor looked over the fence. I didn't care. I said it again. We did it. Money is a quiet war. I learned to fight it with silence. I sold the second car. I took night work nobody wanted. I fixed fences on weekends and cleaned offices before dawn. I learned to sleep on buses and count tips twice. I stopped buying anything that wasn't necessary and made necessary a smaller word. He never asked, I never told. That was our agreement, though we never said it out loud. Let him fly. Let me push. What mattered was the runway, not the person laying down the lights in the dark so the plane could see where to land. Now, look at me in that kitchen, reading the message. Don't come, you'll ruin my day. My day. The words didn't even sting as much as the ownership did. My day, like graduation, was a party he'd planned and paid for himself. I suppose that's how it felt from where he stood, surrounded by people his age, moving fast, talking fast, thinking blue sky thoughts. From there, a father can look like old furniture, useful once now in the way. I used to think I would be angry at that. I wasn't. I understood youth as a mirror with the world behind it. You see yourself, sharp and bright, and everything else is a blur. What I couldn't accept was the cruelty. Ban. The word he chose was not please, or maybe not today, or I need space. It was a cut, a sentence dressed as a command, delivered with a thumb, and then the block, clean, final, nothing dramatic, no slammed door, no broken plate, just a switch flipped somewhere in a pocket, and a father unhooked from his son's life like a limp wire. I stood up and rinsed my cup. The water ran clear. The phone stayed face down on the table. I wiped the counter with slow, even motions. When you don't know what to do, tidy something. That's what she used to do when the world grew large. She'd make the bed with hospital corners and then feel strong enough to face what was coming. I folded the dish towel in, half, then in half again. I hung it straight. These are small things, yes, but small things are how you survive big ones. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay on my back and watched the light from passing cars move across the ceiling like rivers. I thought of her hand finding mine under plastic clinic blankets. I thought of our boy's first steps, how he had aimed for her lap like a ship aiming for its harbor. I thought of the way he tilted his head when he didn't understand something, stubborn and curious at once. I thought of the bills we paid, the forms we filled, the counselors who took meetings with me because I refused to leave the hallway. I thought of the word benefactor. I had always liked the taste of it. It sounds like the opposite of thief, someone who puts rather than takes. I never wore the word, but it fit in private. Maybe you are wondering why I didn't call from another number, why I didn't show up anyway and make a scene. That's not how I was raised. That's not how she would have wanted it. The world teaches you to be loud when you're hurt. She taught me to be exact. So I lay there and measured the door, the hinges, the lock. He had shut me out with a message. But there are doors in every building that the guests never see. There are keys nobody knows they're holding. I turned on my side and closed my eyes. I didn't pray. I don't do that much anymore. But I did talk to her. "Front row," I whispered. "You said front row." In the quiet, the answer felt simple, clear as a path. I could almost see her smiling like she did when she knew I had finally caught up to an idea she had given me hours ago. By morning, the decision had settled in me like a stone on the bottom of a river, heavy, calm, not moving. I got up before the sun and shaved. I wore the blue tie she liked. I ironed my shirt twice, the way she would have. I polished my shoes until I could see my face in them. I ate half a slice of toast and left the other half on the plate by habit, as if she would come into the kitchen and take it with a mock scold. I checked the envelope in my jacket pocket. I didn't need to, but I did. Some habits are not superstition. They are respect. People say the years make you hard. That isn't true. The years just teach you which part of yourself to trust. I trusted the part that kept the lights on. I trusted the part that does not shout. I trusted the promise I made in a hospital room that smelled like bleach and orange peels. Stand your ground. Be the place he can return to, if he ever chooses to return. On my way out, I paused by the framed photo on the hall table. The three of us at the lake, our faces burnt red by the sun, his hair sticking up, her hand cupped around his ear as she told him a secret that made him gasp. I touched the glass. "We're going, love," I said softly. "We're going to sit where you said." The door clicked shut behind me, not loud at all. The morning air smelled of cut grass and heat coming. The city was already stretching its arms. I walked to the bus stop, the blue tie tucked into my jacket to keep it straight, and I thought of the stage I had never seen and the crowd I had never met, and the boy who had become a man I barely recognized. I also thought of something else, something that moved under the surface of all those thoughts like a slow, sure current. He thought he had blocked me. He had blocked a number. Numbers are small. What we build with our hands is not. Tell me where you are, the room you're in, the seat you're taking as you hear this. Maybe your chair is old and squeaks. Maybe you're on a bus with your phone in your hand too. Maybe you have a son, or you are a son, or you lost someone who called you star. However far you are, understand this. Love is work. It leaves calluses you can't see. It also leaves a map. And even when someone tries to tear the map, the roads remain where they always were, patient, waiting, leading toward a place called front row, where a promise sits down and folds its hands and waits for the lights to rise. The bus windows were dusty and turned the morning into a softer thing, as if the world had been wrapped in gauze. I sat by the aisle with my blue tie folded into my jacket and watched the city pass in strips, vendors lifting shutters, school children in crooked lines, a man washing his stoop with a bucket and a short hose that hissed like a patient snake. The driver kept the radio low. A woman sang about rain and forgiveness. I nodded to the rhythm and let my head rest against the seat. When you are on your way to a place you have been told not to enter, it helps to move like water. You don't argue with the rock. You go around it. A boy got on 2 stops later with a backpack too big for his shoulders. He paid with coins he had warmed in his fist. He took the seat across from me and looked at my jacket, at the careful knot of my tie. I smiled. He smiled back because children haven't learned how not to. "Big day?" he asked, bold in the way only the young can be. "Someone's graduating," I said. "My son." He nodded, impressed by the idea of sons and gowns. "Will he see you?" he asked. The bus made a sharp turn and the question landed like a glass set on a table. "He will," I said, and my voice was so flat and even that the boy believed me. He looked out the window, already thinking of something else. Outside, a woman in a bright shawl crossed the road at a slant, daring the traffic to touch her. I thought about the last time my son and I had shared a road and a destination. It was months before the message, on a cool night with a clear sky. I had been invited to a dinner by one of his professors, a small celebration for the team that had won something important. I asked if I should come, or if seating was tight. He said, "Come if you want," in a tone that suggested wanting would be an embarrassment. I ignored the tone and put on a clean shirt. When I arrived, I stood near the door because I didn't want to pull focus. He came in with 2 friends and a girl he had introduced once over a quick coffee, a girl with eyes like polished stones and a mouth that didn't bend easily at the ends. She took one glance at me and tilted her head toward my son, a silent question that had the shape of a warning. He didn't meet my eyes immediately. He let his friends go ahead, then stepped close enough for me to smell the mint on his breath. "Hey," he said, looking at the floor, then at the ceiling, then finally at me. "Listen, there's a seating plan. It's formal." I told him I didn't mind standing by the wall. He said, "It's not that. It's just, this is kind of for us, you know?" He smiled like people do when they are cutting a rope and want you to thank them for the clean edge. I looked at his shoes. They were new. I had paid for half without telling him. I nodded. "I know." He patted my arm like you pat a dog that has stayed too long near the table, and then he walked in without looking back. I stood outside for a while. The restaurant window made a mirror of the street, and in it my tie looked too formal, a small flag of a country nobody visited. I heard laughter from inside, the kind of laughter that climbs on chairs. After a time, the hostess came out with a sympathetic mouth. "Sir," she said, "you can wait at the bar if you like." I said I liked the night air. It smelled faintly of cumin and car exhaust, of things humans do to make life taste better and move faster. Across the road, a taxi pulled up, and the driver leaned out to greet a man with a careful bow. I thought about walking in anyway, finding the corner nearest the kitchen door, becoming part of the room like a coat on a hook. Then I heard his voice through the half-open window, bright with the confidence that a full room gives, saying, "My father? He's busy. He keeps to himself." The girl with the polished eyes laughed at that. The laugh had the shape of approval. I did not push the door. I am not a man who forces locks. There were other small cuts. The day of my birthday, a package arrived with a card that read, "Best Wishes," in a font chosen by a marketing team that had never met me. Inside was a leather wallet that had never been near a human hand. It smelled of chemicals and dust. The tag was still on it, and the receipt showed it had been bought by his fiance's mother, not him. "They wanted to send something," he texted when I asked if I should thank them. It was her idea. He added a thumbs up, as if grace could be pressed into a square and sent. That day I took my old wallet, the cloth one she had mended twice with tiny stitches, and brushed its frayed edge smooth. I put the new wallet in a drawer with a hotel pen and a stack of spare keys that fit doors I no longer visited. And I locked the drawer because sometimes you must place a period on a sentence or it will keep you talking long after there is anything left to say. The worst conversation did not involve any raised voices. It happened on a Sunday when I had cooked too much food and wanted to pack some for him. I sent a message. "There's biryani, come by, or I can meet you somewhere." He wrote back, "Don't worry." I said, "It would be my joy." He waited an hour to answer and then wrote, "It's not about joy, it's about boundaries." I stared at that word until it looked like a fence drawn by a tired child. Too many planks, the angles wrong, the gate missing. I typed back, "Understood." He wrote, "Good." I put the spoon down and turned off the stove and sat at the table until the food grew cold. Later, I packed it into small boxes and carried them to the neighbor, who always greeted me with a laugh and called me uncle. He opened his door and his daughter ran to my legs. "For us?" she cried. "For you," I said, and she clapped because children do not worry about boundaries when there is a warm smell in the hall. A different Sunday, he came by to collect some documents. He stood in the doorway as if the house might stain him. "You should sell this place," he said, looking past me. "It's too much for you." I leaned against the frame and folded my arms. "Your mother wanted me to keep it." He shrugged. "Mom had feelings about everything." He said it like feelings were weeds. I said, "She planted this garden." He gave a small, oblivious smile. "That's what I mean." I turned and looked at the old bookshelf she had sanded and painted in the first spring we lived here. The paint was chipped on the edge where she always put her teacup. I ran my thumb over that chip. "The house stays," I said. He lifted his chin. "Suit yourself." That phrase came from his fiance's family, from a world where sentences sounded like instructions wrapped in velvet. He picked up the envelope he had come for and walked out without touching anything. After he left, I opened the drawer with the new wallet inside and then closed it again, gently, like tucking in a child who is not mine. Why am I telling you this? Because betrayal does not arrive like a storm. It is a change in pressure that makes doors stick and ears pop, and then, sometimes weeks later, the window gives up and rattles in its frame. By the time the message, "Don't come, you'll ruin my day," arrived, I had already felt the air thinning. That's why, when it did arrive, I did not decide anything new. I simply finished the decision I had begun the first time he looked through me to greet someone else. The bus pulled into the stop nearest campus, and the boy with the big backpack hopped up before the wheels had finished turning. "Good luck," he said, and I thanked him like he had given me something. The campus gates were taller than I remembered from my first visit years ago, when we had come to take. As a tour, and he had pointed at a building with glass walls and said, "That's where I'll be?" Today those walls caught the morning and folded it into neat rectangles. People were already gathering, young faces scrubbed and shining, old faces careful with pride, cameras lifted like offerings to a small, merciless God that eats every moment and gives it back in pixels. I joined the stream moving toward the auditorium. On the lawn, a group of graduates in gowns posed with their arms thrown around each other's shoulders, triumphant and loud. I stopped by the sign with the map and traced the paths with my eye. I didn't need the map. I had been here at strange hours, in other seasons, to offices most parents never saw. I had stood in lines where nobody brought balloons. I had sat with bursars and advisors and administrators whose pens move fast and whose eyes move faster. The university looks one way from the auditorium entrance and another from the offices behind the library where the quiet work is done. Forms, fees, the small mercy of extensions, the large mercy of forgiveness. Near the main doors, an usher in a navy blazer held a clipboard. "Tickets," she asked, as if the word itself could open and close doors. I gave her a name, not my son's, mine. She checked the list. Her expression rearranged, smoothing into respect so quickly it felt like a trick of light. "Yes, sir," she said, stepping aside. "You're on the dean's list for reserved seating, front row." My face stayed still. Only my breath changed shape, softer on the exhale. "Thank you." She guided me down the carpet, past the people jostling for a good angle. The stage smelled of varnish. The chairs in the front had small plaques taped to the back with names written in a careful hand. Mine was there, centered, my first name spelled correctly. A small miracle in a life of misspellings. I touched the paper with 2 fingers and sat. The fabric of the chair was new. It scratched my palms lightly. I placed the envelope in my jacket so that its edge lay flat against my heart. I want to tell you how that envelope came to be. Years ago, when a shortfall threatened to turn a semester into a detour, I had gone to the financial aid office one more time, even after they had told me 3 times that the bucket was dry. I wore my work boots because I did not have time to change. The man behind the desk had a nameplate made of wood and a kind smile that had learned how to say no without hurting as much as it once did. I put my hands on the edge of his desk so he could see the grease under my nails. "I'm not asking for charity," I told him. "I'm asking for a bridge." He looked at me a long time. He said, "We have a small fund for emergencies. It's not much." I said, "It's more than nothing." He said, "It comes with a condition. The donor asked to remain anonymous, and they wanted this fund to carry your wife's name on the internal ledger. Is that acceptable?" My throat closed. I couldn't speak. He misunderstood my silence and began to explain something about paperwork, about how the ledger name wasn't public. I finally managed, "It's acceptable." I signed where he pointed. We shook hands. The money came through in 48 hours. That semester stayed unbroken. Later, I met with someone higher up, someone who liked blue suits and the word legacy. And we talked about a small endowment with very specific language. I sold a piece of land that didn't look like much until you looked at the city's plans and then it looked like the future. The endowment became larger than anyone expected. I asked for 2 things: that the fund cover students with stories like our boys, and that sometimes, when the arithmetic made a cruel face, the fund could quietly cover the exact gap between a bill and a dream. They nodded. I said the name of the fund and watched their faces change as if the air had shifted. It was her name, of course, no one else's. I asked to remain anonymous, not to play a game, but to protect the clean line between effort and luck, between pride and gratitude. And still, there were moments like today when the line wanted to be a circle, closing on itself in a neat, undeniable shape. So, here I was in the front row, as she had always said we would be. People took their seats in a slow tide. A man to my left checked his watch, then opened a program and traced the list of names with a finger like he was counting prayers. A grandmother behind me told a child to whisper. The child loudly promised to whisper, and then asked if whispering still counted if it was excited. I smiled. The lights warmed. A smell of flowers pushed in from somewhere backstage. On the giant screens on either side of the stage, the live feed began. A wide shot of the hall, then a close-up of the banners, then a cut to the graduates filing in. I watched their faces appear and disappear like fish. For a breath, there he was, my son. Straight-backed, cap balanced just so, mouth set in a line that hoped to be a smile, but had not been given permission. The camera slid away. My heartbeat did not speed up. It slowed, steady beats, like someone knocking softly on a familiar door. I thought about standing up at that moment and waving, as he had done when he was a shepherd with a pillowcase robe. But the screen moved on, and I stayed seated, my hands folded. It wasn't time. Timing, she used to say, is the difference between a story and a mess. Don't rush the page, she would add, as if life were a book you could hold and turn with care. I could feel her beside me in the empty air, the quiet weight of her approval like a shawl on my shoulders. The music changed. The dean walked to the podium. He was a man who had learned to let silence land before he spoke. He placed his hands on either side of the lectern and looked at us as if he knew every face. "Welcome," he said, and the hall attached itself to his word and became still. He began the ritual words: honor, achievement, journey, community. And I let them pass through me like old songs, you know, but don't need to sing along to. My eyes moved over the crowd, not searching for my son, but letting him be part of a larger pattern. The truth is, for all his careful cruelty, for all his quiet cuts, I did not want to own this day. I wanted only to hold my promise and keep it unbroken. That promise fit neatly into my pocket and pressed into my chest with the steady insistence of something alive. During a pause, the dean spoke of stories behind the gowns, of parents and guardians and mentors who had made invisible bridges. He said the word benefactor, and a murmur moved like wind in tall grass. He looked out over our heads toward the back of the hall, as if the person he spoke of might be hiding there. I looked at my hands. The knuckles were dry. The veins rose like small blue roads to places I could no longer visit. I flexed them once and then kept them still. The dean said there was a tradition. He said gratitude is a form of truth, and he promised to honor the anonymous. People clapped because people understand, at least with their hands, that unseen work still counts. I felt the envelope and thought about edges. The envelope held nothing dramatic, no trump card that needed slamming on a table. It was a letter, 3 paragraphs long, written in my careful print, addressed to a person who wore a blue suit and liked the word legacy. The letter said that today, in my wife's name, the fund would be extended to cover a new set of scholarships for students whose parents could not come, because they worked, because they were far away, because they were gone, or because something had broken that could not be fixed with a phone call. It was a gesture only, a quiet one. It would not heal my son or correct his mouth or teach him how to speak with care, but it would keep a different set of children from getting messages like the one I received. Sometimes you make a bridge not toward a person who turned away, but toward a stranger who might not. The ushers finished seating the last latecomers. Somewhere above, a camera red light blinked to life. I imagined it turning this room into 1,000 small rectangles crowded onto screens and living rooms and kitchens and buses and cities I would never see. Perhaps you are in one of them. You can pin this moment and talk about it later. For me, it was only a breath drawn in and held, the kind of breath you take before placing a stone where it belongs. The dean closed one folder and opened another. He smiled in a way that felt practiced but honest. "Before we confer degrees," he said, "there is one more thing." My hands did not move. The room leaned toward him, gently, as if he had a secret to release into it. He did. And somewhere in that leaning, in that warm pause, in that clean, expectant quiet, I felt the strongest thing I have left rise up in me. Not anger, not even pride, just a steady certainty, cool and clear as water in a deep well, that I had walked the right road to the right chair, and that the next step would be taken without rush, without triumph, without any face turned toward me except the one I came to see. The dean lifted his head and let the silence sit with us like a guest. He understood rooms. He knew when a crowd was breathing in. "Before we confer degrees," he said, his hands steady on the wood, "we would like to acknowledge someone who has quietly changed the stories of many students here. This person asked to remain anonymous for years, but today, with their permission, we would like to offer our thanks in the open. A light hum moved through the hall. People leaned forward. Programs rustled like dry leaves. I felt my heartbeat slow into even clicks. 1, 2, 3, like a clock that had decided to keep going because it had a job. He spoke about bridges again, how some are made of stone and some of time. He said the name of the fund in a careful voice, and I heard her name ring clear, the way it did in our kitchen when I said it the first time, after she was gone, to see if the air still held it. The screens flashed a simple slide, a date, a number, her name in clean letters, nothing fancy. It was more beautiful than any banner. Someone behind me clapped too early and then stopped, embarrassed. The dean smiled toward the sound like a father forgiving a child for opening a gift before being told to. If our benefactor is present, he said, we would be honored to welcome them to the stage. I could have stayed seated. That would have been another kind of power. But I stood because promises kept their shape better when the body joined in. The chair legs whispered against the floor. I buttoned my jacket. The envelope pressed a neat rectangle against my ribs. For a fraction, nothing happened. Then the camera found me. The red eye blinked, the lens drank me whole, and there I was on both screens, my face older than I think it is, my tie the calm blue she liked, my mouth not smiling. You don't smile at a church you built brick by brick, you just walk inside. Gasps rose like birds taking off. It wasn't my name that caused them, because most didn't know it. It was the puzzle snapping into place. You can feel a room realize something. The air changes temperature. The graduates turned in their seats, a ripple in a field of black caps. The parents craned, and on the far left aisle, third row of the student section, my son's smile died. It was a small death at first, the corners loosened, the cheeks losing their hold. Then it slid off his face entirely, leaving behind a bare expression I knew from when he was little and told one lie, then another. And the truth arrived like a knock he didn't know how to answer. I didn't look at him for more than a breath. Looking too long would have made the moment about us. This wasn't about us. This was about a promise and a name and a chair in the front row, where a woman who loved the word yet would have sat and squeezed my hand. I took the aisle slowly. Shoes squeaked somewhere up in the balcony. The usher at the foot of the stairs touched her earpiece and stepped aside with that same quick respect, but her eyes were wet. Perhaps she had read the ledger. Perhaps she had a father somewhere who kept his voice low and his hands busy. The steps to the stage were shallow, built for careful feet. My knees, which have known ladders and warehouse stairs and sidewalks with broken edges, liked the feel of them. There is a way to put your foot down when a room is looking at you, firm but not hard, like setting a glass on a table you made yourself. The dean met me at the top with his hand out and that public smile that says, a private thank you. His grip was dry, honest. Sir, he said, low enough that it was ours, thank you for what you've done and for letting us do this. I nodded. My words when they came were the simplest ones. For her, I said. He knew who her was. He squeezed my hand once, then released it. He turned to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, and he said my name. It sounded strange in a big room. Names are used to small spaces, kitchens, porches, a shout across a yard. The applause started polite and then changed shape. It grew. Not wild, not the kind that stands on chairs. Just a full, steady sound like rain that knows what it's doing. I let it wash over me and kept my face quiet because I wasn't here to take anything. I was here to place something where it belonged. The dean raised his hand and the rain softened. He gestured to the microphone. He didn't have to. He had already given me more voice than I planned to use. But I stepped forward half a pace and stood close enough that my breath brushed the black head of the mic. My voice has never been large. It doesn't need to be. Rooms like this are built to carry small truths. Thank you, I said. This is my wife's name, you see. She believed in front rows. She believed that if a child could find their people and their place, they would walk straighter. I paused long enough to see faces lift. We came from a house with thin walls and thick hope. We learned how to stretch a month. We learned how to say yet. Not there yet, not enough yet, not ready yet. Yet is a bridge. This endowment is her word turned into a bridge. The hall held still. I took one clean breath. If you are walking across it today, walk steady. Someone you may never meet stood beneath it for years to make sure it wouldn't shake. I stepped back. That was enough. The dean nodded like a man who had tasted something and found it the right amount of salt. He gestured toward the chairs at the back of the stage. I shook my head. "Front row," I said, so only he would hear. He understood. "Of course." He motioned to the usher to guide me down. As I turned, the camera angle shifted without mercy or malice, searching for the reaction that television teaches us to want. It found him. My son on the big screen, cap square, tassel straight, face stripped down to the bone truth of being seen. The hall felt the cut and hummed. He swallowed. His eyes flicked toward the graduate beside him, toward the girl with polished eyes 2 rows back, toward the balcony where the families with loud applause sat. Then, not toward me. Not yet. He looked at the floor. It is hard to look at a stage when the stage looks back. I took the steps down and walked the aisle to my chair. People reached out to touch my sleeve. I kept my hands to myself. When I sat, the screens returned to the dean, who was already pouring oil back into the gears of ritual. The names would be read, the degrees conferred, the pictures taken, the boxes ticked in 100 offices before anyone went home to hang a frame. The machine would do its part, but the air had changed. People in the rows around me began to whisper, not ugly whispers, the kind that tell a story they think they have just seen from the beginning, when, in truth, they have joined it in the middle. A woman 2 seats away leaned over the empty chair between us. "Was that your wife's name?" she asked in a voice that carried care. "Yes," I said. She patted the back of my hand exactly once, like a period. "It looked beautiful up there," she said, and turned forward again, satisfied, as if she had straightened a picture frame and the room had thanked her. On stage, the dean returned to the script, but not quite. He said he would share one detail because gratitude should be precise. He described, without names, the kind of students the fund had helped. "Students from households like yours," he said to the hall, sweeping a hand like an oar through water. "Working families, families who know how to fix things that break, families who give more than they have because it is their way." He told a short story about a semester saved, about an email sent at midnight, answered at dawn, about how the right amount at the right time can move a mountain an inch, the only distance a mountain will move for a human hand. He didn't say my son's name. He didn't need to. People can do the arithmetic when the numbers are on the board. Somewhere to my left, a classmate elbowed another and murmured a guess. Somewhere behind me, someone said, "Ah," the way people do when a coin finally falls into the slot. My eyes found the aisle again, not to count steps but to steady myself with something measured. I am not cruel. I won't pretend there wasn't a part of me that wanted him to look, that wanted the camera to catch the exact second the mirror cracked and the room behind it sprang into focus. But I did not come to watch a face fall. I came to stand where she said we would stand, and to lay down one more plank on a bridge built of too many nights and the patience of a love that refuses to raise its voice. The dean invited a small group of students to speak for their class. A woman with a voice that could have carried across a field told a story about the first time she felt like she belonged in a room with clean floors and cold air. A man with nervous hands made us laugh without meaning to, then on purpose, and then he made us quiet by accident, which is the rarest talent. With each voice I felt the hall get bigger, not in size but in kindness. For a moment, it felt like a place my wife would have liked, because people were being their plain selves instead of auditioning for a role. Then came the part of the ceremony that is the same in every language. Names read, a rhythm set, the scrape of chairs as families rise and sit, as if doing gentle exercise for the heart. When they called the first row, the line moved like a river, answering a gravity no one resists. The camera followed, framing faces that glowed, flushed, trembled, held. I watched hands. Hands tell the truth when mouths try to be clever. I saw hands clench and release. I saw fingers tap. I saw palms pressed flat against gowns to smooth something imagined. When it was his row's turn to stand, my son brushed his sleeve twice, a habit from childhood he had never broken. It used to mean ready. It still did. He stepped into the aisle, and the camera stepped with him. The operator knew a story thread when it tugged. I didn't move. The dean called a name ahead of his and another behind, so his came to my ears wrapped in other sounds, like a secret folded into a letter. He walked toward the stage without looking left or right. He had always been good at focusing, good at drawing a line from himself to the thing he wanted and then following it like a wire pulled taut. When he climbed the steps, he did not trip. He did not hesitate. He shook hands with the dean with the practiced grip of a young man who has met people who liked blue suits and the word legacy. He turned for the photo. The lens took him in and gave him back. And then, because rooms are living things and cameras are curious beasts, the screen split for a breath. Him on one side, me on the other. Two faces held in a public square, and in between us, the thin line of the stage, the mic, the dean, the banners, all the ceremony that stands between a father and a son when they stop speaking and start performing. I did not flinch. I did not nod. I let the moment sit there, unthreatened by my need to make it smaller or larger than it was. He looked at me. Not long. Enough. His eyes did the quick math of pride and shame, gratitude and anger, history and present tense. Then he did something I will own until I am dust. He dipped his head, almost nothing, like a boy letting a lid close softly on a box that holds a fragile thing. The room did not see it. The camera, hungry for bigger gestures, had already moved on to a girl throwing both arms up with a shout that made her grandmother forget to whisper. But I saw it. It was not an apology. It was not forgiveness. It was a small acknowledgement that the floor under his feet had been laid by hands he had chosen to forget, until a screen told him they were still here. Sometimes that is the first true movement a mountain makes. When he returned to his seat, the graduates around him clapped his back and leaned close with questions. Youth is always looking for the story inside the story. I did not read his lips. I am not a spy. I watched the dean at the podium and listened to the names as if each one were a bell rung for a different house on the same street. But in my side vision, there was the shape of him, stiffer now, smaller somehow, as if the gown no longer fit just right. The girl with the polished eyes did not look at him. She stared at the screen waiting for her own face. She would learn, or not, that some faces are not meant for screens. The letter in my pocket warmed with my body heat. I thought of what it would set in motion when I handed it over after the ceremony. A few signatures. A notice sent to the right inboxes. Next year, maybe 10 chairs filled by students who would not have sat otherwise. The year after that, more. A ripple is only a ripple at the start. If it keeps moving, someone one day calls it a tide. This is what I wanted for her name. A tide that touches shores she never walked on. A motion that says yes when the world says not yet. The dean reached the last page of the list. The hall felt that approach and prepared itself the way bodies do when a familiar song nears its last chorus. My mind did not wander ahead. It stayed with each clap, each click of heel on step, each good hand extended and taken. When people ask me later what it felt like, I will tell them it felt like work. Honest, necessary, repetitive, holy work. Like sweeping a porch before the sun hits it. Like setting out plates, like winding a clock, like tucking a blanket back over a small knee that has slipped into the cold. A final cheer rose and settled. Caps shifted but did not yet fly. Another ritual had to walk first. The dean stepped away, and the choir sang 2 verses of something old enough to have soothed more dangerous rooms. The microphone squeaked once and then obeyed. The hall, full of people who had been many things to get here, stubborn, lucky, humble, loud, grew quiet for the exact time required and no more. I looked up at the high beams and thought of rafters I had painted, of ladders held by hands I trusted, of ceilings you don't notice when the work is done right. I have made things people ignore. This is my favorite kind of making. When the choir sat, the dean invited us all to stand and honor the class. The wave ran through us, rising and falling. Around me, seats clicked up and knees unbent, and hands found each other to clap. I stood too, my palms flat at first, then meeting with sound, not for him alone, but for the idea that carried him and the rest to this moment, the idea that the future is not bought only with genius, but with lunches packed and buses caught and papers signed by people sitting at tables late into the night, with a pen that did not run dry. My clapping joined the rooms, and for a breath I felt her hand slide into mine and squeeze. I did not turn to look. Some things are true, even if your eyes cannot help you see them. When the last echo of clapping folded itself into the rafters, the hall loosened its shoulders the way a crowded room does when it has done its duty. Programs closed with soft snaps. Gowns rustled like leaves. The music shifted to something bright and forgettable, the kind of tune that knows it is meant to be background. I sat a breath longer, letting the chair hold me, letting the blue of my tie cool against my throat. The giant screens gave up their solemn faces and turned into mirrors again, catching stray smiles and hands waving signs with names painted in quick strokes. All around me, people stood and sat in a bobbing rhythm. Bags gathered, bouquets lifted, shawls straightened, 100 tiny preparations to go from ceremony back to life. I rose and smoothed my jacket once. It was a small gesture, but it was mine. The usher in the navy blazer came down the aisle, careful of knees and flower stems. "Sir," she said, lowering her voice, "the dean asked if you'd like to step backstage for a moment." She held her clipboard like a shield that had been set down between us. I looked toward the stage and saw the dean talking to the choir director, his hand already halfway raised with a question only I could answer. "1 minute," I said, and the usher nodded, like she understood that a man sometimes needs to set his pace himself. The aisle felt narrower now, packed not by wood and chairs, but by the weight of eyes that pretended not to follow. I walked without hurry, stepping around a dropped phone, a heel stuck in the carpet, a child turning in small, delighted circles under the high lights. At the foot of the stage, the usher guided me past a velvet rope and through a blue curtain into a corridor colder by a few degrees. Back here, the air smelled of coffee and dust and something sweet, citrus from a plate of slices that had already begun to dry at the edges. A student worker with a stack of programs taller than her torso smiled and pressed her back to the wall to let me pass. "Congratulations," she whispered, and I let the word float by. It belonged to the room I had just left. The dean waited near a table holding a white pot, cups thin as eggshells, a bowl of sugar like a snowdrift. Up close, he looked smaller, younger, as people do, when they have removed the distance a stage gives. "Thank you," he said again, and his thank you was not the broad one he had given the hall. This one had measurements. He held it out with both hands. I set the envelope on the table between us. "For the office," I said. "It names what we spoke about. A continuation, a widening." He touched the corner of the paper like he was testing a heat. "We are honored," he said, "and careful." I believed him. His eyes were the kind that had read too many files to be fooled by pretty sentences. "One request," I added. "If you ever put her name anywhere on a wall we can see, put it low. Knee height. A tired student should see it when they sit to tie a shoe and feel, for a second, less alone." He smiled at that in a way that belonged to him alone, a small, surprised tilt. "Done," he said. A camera operator wandered in with his rig sleeping against his shoulder. He looked at us, and then looked away. Some people know when to let a moment keep its coat on. "Will you join the platform party next year?" the dean asked, half question, half habit. I shook my head. "Front row is where I belong," I said. "That's where she put us." He understood more than my words. "Then we'll keep a chair," he said, and poured tea that steamed like a quiet thought. I did not drink, I did not sit. I signed the copy he slid toward me, wrote the date in my careful numbers, handed the pen back. The room hummed with the beginning of goodbye, a gentle pull toward the places we each needed to be. "Go," I said, chin toward the stage. "They're waiting for your voice." He gave a small bow, not from culture, but from gratitude, and he left, the tail of his gown whispering against the painted floor. I stood a moment longer and looked at the bulletin board where notices tried to outshout each other with fonts and exclamation marks. Summer jobs, study abroad. A flyer for a mindfulness circle that met on Thursdays at 4. A photo of last year's class, frozen caps, frozen mouths, frozen joy. Thumbtacked at an angle that made the horizon look like it was going to slide everything off. I reached out to straighten it, but stopped my hand in the air. Some tilts belong to the picture. They're honest about the win that day. I let it be and stepped back through the blue curtain into the warm chaos of families finding each other. The lobby had turned into a marketplace of pride. People floated on fumes of joy and relief. Everywhere, phones held at arm's length, mouths open in the universal shape that photographs make of us. A girl handed her father a bouquet, and he pretended to be surprised the way fathers have pretended since paper learned to hold ink. Someone dropped a cap. A stranger picked it up, dusted it with his sleeve, returned it with a nod. The building felt like a chest just then. ribs around a heart that had decided to beat a little harder for an hour. I moved through it slowly, letting the crowd carry me, listening for a voice I knew better than any. I didn't hear it. He has my quiet when he wants to keep something to himself. Outside, the day had turned definite. The sun meant its light. On the lawn, the big oak made a circle of shade that held 20 families. At once, each circle inside the bigger one, stories overlapping like ripples. I saw him near the far edge of the grass, black gown, tassel hanging, head turned half away. His fiancée stood to his right, touching the edge of her lip, as if checking a line only she could see. Two people beside them wore the kind of clothes that talk without sound, tailored where fabric usually gives up. I had seen the woman once across a restaurant window. Her mouth hadn't bent easily then either. The man with her held a camera like a small weapon. He was positioning his daughter and my son as if he were laying out a page, moving shoulders, adjusting chins, pressing them closer until they were the right amount of together. I stopped at the edge of their space because entering uninvited is something I do not do, even when the blood in the circle is mine. A professor noticed me first, a woman with short hair and kind eyes who had once met me at 7 a.m. to sign a form before a deadline crept up and knocked. She came toward me with her hand out and a laugh already in her body. "There you are," she said, and the warmth in her voice made the few people near us turn. "I wanted to thank you again, personally. You made the right kind of difference." She glanced past me, and her face softened the way faces do when they see a former student and remember their first paper, their first answer, their first failure. "He worked hard," she said quietly. Whatever else was going on, I inclined my head. "I know," I said, and the two words were the size of a house. The fiancée saw the professor talking to me. A small calculation ran through her eyes like beads on a string. She touched my son's arm. He turned. The camera lowered a few inches. The woman with the careful mouth lifted her chin and took a step forward as if she were walking into a meeting she had been told would be quick. "Hello," she said to me in a tone that tried to be generous but could not quite forget its angle. "So wonderful to finally meet." Finally meant, we kept you in a drawer and opened it when company came. "Congratulations," I said, simple as bread. I did not offer my hand. She looked at it anyway, as if its not offering were a puzzle with missing pieces. My son was looking at me now. The face he wore was the one he used when a professor asked a question, to which there were two possible answers and both tasted strange. He took a half step, then another. The fiancée's fingers tightened on his sleeve. She released him a second later, like a good actor hitting a mark. He crossed the grass. We were 3 feet apart, then 2, then 1. The smell of cut lawn came up under the heat and reminded me of mornings when I had pushed a mower with dull blades and pretended it did the job just fine. He opened his mouth. "Dad!" he started. It landed between us the way a forgotten toy lands when a box is knocked over. Sudden, familiar, dangerous if you step without looking. I lifted my palm, not high, just enough to place a thin pane of glass over the word. My voice was flat even. "Not today," I said. 2 words, measured. He blinked. His mouth closed because he heard the thing under the words. The promise and the edge, both. I kept my eyes on his so he would not mistake what I was doing for punishment. "You told me I'd ruin your day," I said, soft enough that only he could wear the sentence. "I refuse to." He swallowed, nodded, a small hinge moving under skin he had from her side, fine and stubborn. Behind him, the woman with the careful mouth rearranged her expression into something that looked like concern, photographed for a brochure. The man with the camera raised it again and lowered it again, unable to decide if this was a picture or a private moment that would be a mistake to frame. "I was wrong," my son said, and the words came out in pieces that wanted to be one thing, but had not yet learned how. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not. You'll decide when you're alone." He looked at the grass because the grass can't judge you. "Can we?" he began, and I shook my head once. "Not here," I said. "Take your pictures. Shake the hands you need to shake. Smile where smiling is asked. This is your day. Let it be yours." He stood still in that way he has when he realizes the problem has no quick math. He wanted a scene, not because he likes noise, but because drama can be a shortcut to relief. I did not offer him that shortcut. I offered him the long road he had made with his own feet. The professor, kind-eyed, understood before anyone. She touched his elbow to pull him back to the circle that was waiting like a ring that refuses to slip over a knuckle. He let her guide him. He turned once, halfway, as if to check that I was not disappearing. I stayed where I was. In the corner of my eye, I saw the fiancé's mother pivot as if on a small wheel and come toward me with a smile that had been sharpened for a different purpose. "We've always supported education," she said, hands lifted lightly, bracelets chiming, words chosen to be placed on a resume as a virtue. "We give where we can." I nodded. "Good," I said. She waited for more, names, amounts, a chance to braid her story to mine. I did not offer rope. She tilted her head, a bird considering bread that might be stone, and returned to her cluster, relieved to be among familiar angles. "Sir?" a student with a press badge asked, materializing at my elbow with a notebook already open to a clean page. His face shone with ambition and respect in equal measure. "Could we get a quote, just a line about what today means?" He held the pen as if it were a key. I thought of words and where they go after you say them. "Today means my wife's name was in a good room," I said. "That's enough." He wrote quickly, twice, his mouth moving with each word, and then he lifted the pen, disappointed that I had not given him something that could be on a banner. The best sentences don't like banners. A small cousin of someone ran between us and nearly took my knee out with a paper plane that had pretensions of being a rocket. He collided with my son's gown and bounced back without apology. My son laughed, real laughter, unplanned, clean, the sound of a bell rung by a hand that remembers the right force. For a second, he looked like the boy in the pillowcase robe, the one who waved at the front row. Then the new faces arranged themselves around him, like a frame around an old photo. And the sound changed back into the careful chuckle a young man learns when rooms start listening to him. The heat rose. The smell of sunscreen and roses thickened. People began saying goodbye without leaving, the way crowds do when they want to hold a day by the hem for one more minute. I moved toward the walkway, not fast, not slow. A graduate with a bruise of tiredness under each eye stopped me with a small bow and said, "Thank you," without explaining what for. A mother touched the sleeve of my jacket like it was a piece of a place she wanted her child to reach. A security guard held a door with his foot and nodded like we were the same kind of man for a second, and we were. By the gate, the boy from the bus appeared again, now a smaller planet in a solar system of cousins and a grandmother who wore a shawl the color of marigolds. He pointed at me and said something I couldn't hear over the traffic. The grandmother pressed a sweet into his palm, and he tucked it into his pocket like treasure. He grinned at me as if we had won a small race together. In a way, we had. I lifted 2 fingers in a salute neither of us had earned and went on. On the steps, I paused and looked back across the lawn to where my son stood inside his picture. The man with the camera had found his angle. He said, "One more," the way men like him always say, "one more," when what they mean is dozens. My son's jaw set for the effort of the smile that would be the right one for the wall where it would hang. He did not search the crowd for me because he already knew I was exactly where he had left me, outside the frame, exactly on the edge, exactly where a promise had told me to be. I felt no cruelty in that, only a steady line I had drawn because he had asked for one, and I had decided to be precise. I did not wait for caps to be thrown. That belongs to the young. I walked to the side path where the shade stayed even, and the maintenance men were already coiling cables in contented loops. One of them looked up and said, "Good show," with the practical satisfaction of someone who knows a day by the quality of its edges. "It held," I said, and he nodded. We understood each other in the quiet language of people who fix the visible with the invisible. At the corner, the campus store had propped its door open with a box of discounted pennants. The bell tinkled as students moved in, and out with last-minute intent, mugs for aunties, magnets for fridges that would hold rent notices and recipes and notes written on envelopes. I stood a moment outside the glass, and in my reflection, I saw a man who looked like he belonged in any doorway. Not invited, not refused. Capable of standing his ground for as long as needed without making a scene. I remembered her hand on my wrist the evening we signed the papers for the house we almost couldn't afford. "This is us," she'd said. "Right here." She was pointing at a square on a plan. Today's square was a front row chair and a path between 2 clusters of people who might never meet in the middle. My phone buzzed. Not his number. That string of digits still lived behind a gate he had closed. A message from an unknown contact with a polite greeting and a reminder about the documentation I would receive next week. The office had its own heart, beating, steady. Another ping, a photograph from the kind-eyed professor, the slide with my wife's name, the light on it, kind in a way light sometimes is. For you, she wrote, for her. I typed only, thank you, because gratitude is a small word that doesn't like company. A breeze picked up and carried with it the smell of the lake that hides behind the far trees. A faint wetness, a ghost of cool. I let it pass over my face. I could see him in my side vision even when I didn't turn, my son moving across the grass like a figure cut from a paper chain, linked to people I didn't choose for him, people he had chosen or had been chosen by on his behalf. He stopped once and lifted his phone toward the sky, pointing it at the wide sign that read, "Congratulations," as if the sign might read him back. He lowered it, put the phone in his pocket, took it out again. Old gestures survive new weather. A reporter with a proper camera and a local badge appeared at my elbow, drawn by the minor gravity of a story that wasn't hers. "Sir," she said, kind but hungry, "could you share what it felt like to watch your son cross the stage after all that?" She didn't say what all that was. She didn't need to. The stream had done its work. I looked at her lens, a dark eye that wants everything and gives back slices. "It felt like watching a bridge hold," I said. "That's all?" She waited for more, then realized there wasn't any, and her smile flickered. "That's good," she said, trying it out loud. "A bridge holding." She looked down to write it, and when she looked up, I had already stepped away. Not rudely, just exactly enough. At the bus stop, the bench was warm from other people's plans. I sat at one end, leaving room, always leaving room. A father and daughter took the other end. She held a bouquet so big it hid her small face, and through the flowers she said, muffled, "He cried when they said his name." The father laughed, a soft, embarrassed sound that men use when joy surprises them. "I didn't cry," he said. "My face just leaked." She lowered the bouquet and looked at him as if he had performed a magic trick with weather. I looked away because some tricks deserve privacy. My bus arrived with a sigh, and the doors folded back like lips ready to tell a story again. I climbed on, paid, took the same aisle seat I had taken in the morning. The driver glanced at me in his mirror. Something in his eyes said he had seen the red light blink on the camera and had made his own conclusions. He didn't ask. He drove. Outside, the campus began to shrink, its edges softening as distance did what distance does. I reached into my jacket and felt for the envelope, forgetting for a second that it had already left my care. My fingers closed on fabric. Emptiness can be a comfort when what it means is that a thing has been placed where it belongs. Halfway to my stop, my phone buzzed again. A different number, a sentence without a name, careful punctuation, as if the person who wrote it had checked their work 3 times before sending. "Thank you for not making a scene." I stared at the words. The bus rattled over a seam in the road. I typed nothing. I let the message sit there, warm and weighted, a stone placed on a paper so it wouldn't blow away. After a minute, a second message arrived from the same number. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I watched the city pass, a tailor framed in his doorway with a tape around his neck, a mechanic wiping his palms on a rag that would never be clean, a small boy stumbling and then catching himself without looking around to see if anyone had noticed. I typed one sentence and sent it. "Stand your ground," I wrote. Then I turned the phone face down on my knee and looked out the window where the light lay on everything the same, gentle and without judgment, even on the places that had been sharp this morning, and even on the corners where, if you stood very still, you could feel a tide turning a degree at a time, quiet, inevitable, toward home. The bus sighed me back onto my street, and the afternoon heat settled like a hand on the back of my neck. I walked past the hedge she planted from cuttings a neighbor gave her, past the uneven slab of concrete we always meant to fix, up to the door with the paint rubbed thin where our keys had learned their scratches. Inside, the house kept its own temperature the way old houses do, cool in summer, gentle in winter, stubbornly itself. I hung my jacket and draped the blue tie over the chair she used to fold laundry on, as if the cloth might learn something from the way her hands remembered order. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and stood listening to the small metal complaints it made before it found its song. The phone lay face down on the table. I let it lie. Some conversations ripen if you don't pick them too soon. I made tea the way she liked it, leaves warmed by a swirl of hot water, Then the rest poured in slow. I set 2 cups out without thinking, then put one back and felt foolish and tender at the same time. The clock's click was almost a companion. I carried my cup to the doorway and looked into the small garden where the late sun turned the dust into gold. In the corner, the hose curled like a sleeping snake. A sparrow scolded something only it could see. I remembered the nights I had stood in that doorway with my work boots still on because I was too tired to sit, and the way she would press a cold glass into my hand and say, "Drink, then tell me a small story." I would tell her something that barely qualified as a story, the way a customer folded napkins like boats, the way a boy fell asleep on his father's shoulder on the bus, and she would listen as if I had handed her treasure. Today, I told her this. We sat in the front row. Your name held the room. He walked and did not fall. The bridge held. It wasn't a small story. It was enough of one. I washed the cup and left it upside down to dry. I unbuttoned my shirt and ironed it while it was still warm, a habit she taught me because clothes behave better when asked politely. The iron hissed and smoothed, the phone buzzed once on the table, and then again. I ignored it a third time, in case a habit was trying to form on the other end. When I finally picked it up, the 2 messages I had already read on the bus sat above a third. I unblocked you. The sentence was spare and sounded like paperwork. I typed only a full stop and erased it. I put the phone down and went to the bedroom where the late light made the framed photo on the dresser soft at the edges. Us at the lake, water behind us, our boy between. My wife looking at him like tomorrow was asking permission, and she was inclined to say yes. I slept like a man who had carried something to its place. In dreams, I walked a corridor that smelled of varnish and oranges, and hands I couldn't see turned small brass plaques low, to where tired knees would pause and be met by a name. I woke before the alarm, and for a moment didn't know if the day had passed or doubled back. I made breakfast simple and good. Eggs, tomatoes, bread from the bakery on the corner, where the baker's son always gives me the loaf with the best crust, as if the world were that orderly. I ate slow. The phone lay silent, like a dog that knows it has done enough wrong to stop barking. At 10, there was a knock. Not the nervous tap of someone asking for signatures, not the heavy hand of someone selling fixes, but a plain knock. I wiped my palms, not because they were wet, but because I wanted them to be right. I opened the door. He was there alone. No polished eyes at his shoulder, no careful mouths framing what would be said after I closed the door again. Just him. The gown was gone. He wore a shirt I had seen once before when a photograph found me by accident. He held nothing in his hands which looked young and too experienced at the same time, like hands that had learned to type apologies, instead of speak them. For a breath we stood without language. He was the one who found a word. "Dad," he said. He didn't push it toward me as a gift or use it like a password. He just said it, quiet, the way a person says water when what they mean is they have been thirsty a long time. I moved from the doorway and he stepped sideways to let me pass, as if we were both trying not to cast a shadow on something delicate. He didn't reach to touch me, and I didn't offer him a touch to mishandle. In the kitchen, he looked at the chair by the window and then sat in the one by the wall, the chair I sit in when I need the wall behind me. He looked older there. There is a kind of age that has nothing to do with time, only with standing in a place that expects truth from you. I poured tea for him and didn't ask if he took sugar. He does. He didn't reach for the bowl. He cupped both hands around the heat and waited. "Thank you for yesterday," he said. The sentence was wrong and right. I let it be because correcting a sentence he had only just learned to say would be a small cruelty. "You did your part," I said. "I did mine." He tried a shape of a smile and let it go. "I deserve—" He stopped. People fill that word with a lot. "What do you deserve?" I asked. He looked at the window where the sparrow had returned to sit on the sill and judge us. "Time," he said, and I could tell he had surprised himself. "And to apologize without making it your job to carry the apology for me." I didn't nod in approval. I am not a teacher giving partial credit. I lifted my tea to my mouth, and the heat put a period at the end of the silence. "I don't know how to move from here," he said. Honesty from him sounds like a bent nail being straightened. Awkward, brave, useful. "We move slow," I said. Not because slow is noble, but because fast breaks things we're trying to fix. We start with simple sentences. We set the table. We show up on time. We don't use big words when a small one will hold. He looked at the table. His eyes found the shallow scratch near his right hand, the one that's been there since he was 6 and dragged a fork where he shouldn't. He ran his thumb along it gently, like greeting an old scar. I said things, he started. You did, I said. And you texted a thing, and you blocked me. He winced at that. I did, he said. We let the words sit like objects we were moving around without breaking. He reached into his pocket and took out his phone. He turned the screen toward me. My name, unblocked, no small red minus sign, no gray. I know this doesn't fix anything, he said. It's not about fixing, I said. It's about not adding weight to a table we are already carrying. He looked at the doorway, as if she might come in, balancing a plate on her palm. Mom would have told me to mind my mouth, he said, a small, painful smile. She would have, I said. And then she would have made you eat whether you were hungry or not, because eating is a kind of agreement that you intend to keep living. He swallowed. I miss her more when I'm wrong, he said. That's how you know she raised you, I said. We didn't talk about money. That would have made everything cheaper. We didn't talk about the fund or the speech or the screen. He tried twice to thank me for paying for what he had convinced himself he had earned all alone, and both times the words came out dressed in borrowed clothes. I spared him, and myself, and her name. I didn't build a bridge to stand on it and wave, I said. I built it so you could cross. You crossed. That's the end of that story. He breathed in like a man who had been told a sentence he could carry. What story starts now? He asked. A small one, I said. Sundays, come at 1. Don't text first. If you can't come, you tell me the day before. If you bring anyone, you tell me an hour before. We eat. We don't talk about your job for more than 10 minutes. We don't talk about the ceremony for a while. We talk about food and weather and how the basil refuses to grow in that corner no matter how I bribe it. He nodded. Boundaries, he said, and the word no longer sounded like a fence someone else built to hurt me with. Ours, I said. Not hers, not theirs, not anyone else's. He stared at his hands and then lifted his head with a question in it. What about... He meant the house. He meant his sentence about selling. This house stays, I said, and my voice did not change shape. It stays from respect, not stubbornness. It stays because your mother asked me to stand my ground and because some places learn our names back. He nodded again, slower this time, like someone reading a sign he used to pass without seeing. I was cruel, he said. Yes, I said. I can live with a cruel son who learns. I cannot live with a son who performs kindness for a room and pockets cruelty for home. Decide who you are when no one is filming. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids, I imagine he saw the screen, his face caught in that split image with mine, the line between. He opened them different. We ate bread with butter that went soft in the heat and didn't speak for 5 minutes. Sometimes silence is the most honest language two people share. When he finished, he stood without scraping his chair. He rinsed his plate the way I taught him and left it in the rack at an angle that would make her tut once and fix it. He looked at me again, and I saw the boy and the man in a single face without a seam showing. One on Sunday, he said, repeating what mattered as if it were a line in a play he was trying to get right. One, I said. He stepped toward the door and then stopped. He fumbled and then put his hand out. I took it. We shook, not like men closing a deal, but like two people who needed the weight and temperature of each other's skin to remind themselves that blood isn't only a word. He left. The door caught a breath of wind and almost closed itself, then thought better of it and waited for my hand. I shut it gently. The house took our agreement in and filed it somewhere safe. I stood in the quiet and felt the shape of relief arrive, not like a parade but like rain on dry ground at night, when you hear it first and only later smell it and only later still see the wet in the morning. I went to the bedroom and opened the drawer where the new wallet still lay in its manufactured perfection. I took it out. Not to use it, but to write a small note on a square of paper and place it inside, a message to myself for the day I might need a reminder. We chose small roads. Walk them. In the afternoon, I walked to the lake with a bouquet of marigolds the color of loud joy. The water held the sky like it had been practicing. I sat on our bench, the one that wobbles at one corner no matter how many times someone tightens bolts with borrowed tools, and I told her the rest of the story. I told her about the dean's hands steady on wood, about the way the camera found me like a bird finding a branch it had used before, about the way his smile died and was replaced by a face that could learn again. I told her about tea and bread and a word said right and a word put away. I told her I had asked the plaques to sit low, where tired knees live, and she laughed in the sound the wind sometimes makes when it goes through a screen door. A boy threw stones near the reeds and counted the skips in a bright voice. His father corrected his stance with a gentle palm between the shoulder blades. "Not like that," the boy said, offended by help. "Try it," the father said, and stepped back. The next stone went farther. The boy looked at his own hand as if it had betrayed him by improving. I watched them go, the boy full of something he could not name yet, the father carrying a satisfaction so quiet it could be mistaken for nothing at all. I tightened the ribbon on the marigolds and tucked them into the iron ring where she used to leave single stems and say, "Color is a promise we can keep cheaply." On my way home, a stranger stopped me outside the bakery. He was the father with the leaking face from the bus stop. He had a bag under his arm that crinkled with bread weight. "Sir," he said, "I saw you at the ceremony." It meant something. He looked as if he were asking permission to use my moment for his own courage. "Use it," I said. "That's what moments are for." He nodded and walked away with a new angle to his shoulders, small but there. At home, I opened the window above the sink and let the evening in. I cooked biryani for myself, because practice matters. I packed half for the neighbor and half for the boy on the bus tomorrow if I saw him again. I washed the pot till it shone. The phone buzzed once with a calendar. Reminder I hadn't set. Sunday, 1 p.m. I didn't smile at the screen. I didn't need to. Some smiles have earned the right to live inside and keep their warmth. I went to the hallway table and took the old keys out of the dish, the one shaped like a leaf she bought from a street market because we should bring the outside in when we can. I held his key up. The metal caught a glint of streetlight. I didn't put it on a new ring. I didn't label it. I set it back down and placed another small note under it. Doors don't chase. They wait. Then I turned off the lights one by one, the way I do every night in a sequence that has become a blessing disguised as economy. Kitchen, hall, sitting room, bedroom, each click a sentence without extra words. If you stayed with me through this, if you heard the way a message can sound like a door closing and how a name on a stage can sound like a window opening, tell me where you're listening from. Tell me the city, the street, the room, the bus route, the corner of your kitchen. Tell me if your chair squeaks or your garden is stubborn or your child says yet. Without knowing they were already building a bridge, share this with someone who has worked quietly and with someone who thinks work is only the loud part. Like this if you felt the calm in it. Subscribe if you want more stories told in a voice that won't shout at you, but will stand its ground beside you. And if you do nothing else, pass on the small, useful sentence that carried me through. Stand your ground.